Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, we're back for the first bit of content for 2024, and I hope that you all had a nice new year. Today we are going to take a look at Tangida, the Adeptus Mechanicus Summoner who's coming to the game via Hero Release event this Sunday, January the 7th. Tangida is a Skitarii marshal and represents a high-ranking officer in the Adeptus Mechanicus army. Blessed with advanced bionic augmentation, marshals act as the intermediary between the Skitarii formations and their tech priest masters. As such, they are equipped with advanced uplinks that allow them to refine their warrior doctrines to perfection. This Doctrina imperative is translated into a unique playstyle and mechanic in-game that we'll move on to take a look at next. On the character screen, we can see the fantastic character model here. In his hands, the marshal wields the Radium Serpenta pistol and the control stave, which allows him to further control his Skitarii warriors. The only trait that Tangida has is the mechanical trait. Tangida has a 2-hit physical melee attack and a 1-hit ranged 2 toxic attack. This is the first time that we've seen a playable character with a ranged toxic attack. We can remind ourselves that this has a 70% pierce ratio that also has a 25% chance to apply the Contamination Hex effect. Contamination causes units affected to suffer a 30% armor reduction unless they are mechanical or from the Death Guard faction. His stats are pictured on screen at Diamond 2 and are on the lower side, but I'll show you how these compare to other characters later. His active ability is Doctrina Imperative and is really the defining feature or mechanic for this character. Tangida can use this ability once per round rather than once per battle, and Tangida can still move and attack after using it. Essentially, it toggles the character between the Protector and Conqueror mode. Protector mode gives himself and adjacent friendly mechanical units bonus armor. Conqueror mode changes the buff to bonus damage against targets with reduced armor. His passive ability is a continuation of this concept. If Tangida is in Protector mode, when he attacks, you can summon a Skitarii Vanguard in an adjacent hex. There is a maximum of 5 of these summons at level 50. In Conqueror mode, when Tangida attacks, all adjacent friendly mechanical summoned units also attack the target if it is within range. Yes, this is as fun as it sounds, and we can take a look at this in action through some gameplay footage. On this screen here, I've scaled Tangida down to Bronze 1 and have all of his abilities at level 16, and that's really just to demonstrate how his active and passive abilities work. You can see on screen that we can toggle between the different modes for Conqueror mode and Protector mode, and you'll see a tooltip just underneath the character bar on the top left-hand side of the screen that tells you what mode Tangida is in. Once we swap back to Protector mode, as soon as Tangida attacks, you can see a summoned Skitarii marshal. We'll go through a couple of cycles of gameplay just so you can see how this all interacts, and particularly some interesting AI mechanics for these summoned marshals. We go through a couple of rounds where the Protector mechanic summons some Skitarii Vanguard, and then we interestingly have a look at how they move throughout the battle. You'll see that they leave behind a Contamination Hex effect, and for whatever reason, I guess intentionally, the AI is programmed to move off these Contamination Hex effects, despite the fact that the Skitarii marshals are not affected by them. Why does this matter, you might think? Well, it matters more than you might think, because actually, when you cycle back to the Conqueror mode, you ideally want all of the Skitarii marshal adjacent to Tangida, and if they're not adjacent to Tangida, i.e. moving away and moving off their sort of contamination hexes, it becomes much harder to reliably trigger their additional attack through the Conqueror mode passive ability. And we'll see more of this later on as I demonstrate more interesting nuanced gameplay. The questions I got asked most by my viewers was really, how does Tangida synergize with the other Adeptus Mechanicus, particularly Actus Fulgurosus? We know that Actus can heal friendly mechanical units, and when he does so, causes them to attack again. On this screen, you can see that when Actus healed Tangida, Tangida made another attack and summoned another Skitarii marshal. Here again, we can see that kind of almost unintentional or non-ideal interactions between the Skitarii marshals and the Contamination Hex effect. The marshals seem to move off their Contamination Hex, and therefore it makes it harder to trigger their additional attack through Tangida's Conqueror passive. We can see here after 2 turns there's actually barely any Skitarii martial adjacent to Tangita. In this bit here, we can see how Actus Fulgurosus interacts with Tangita. Actus has an active ability that heals all adjacent mechanical units. When we activate that here, we can see that the Skitarii martial attacks twice, courtesy of Tangita's passive, as well as Tangita attacking once. The other question was about how Vitruvius Thanek might interact with Tangita. We'll know that Vitruvius Thanek applies an ability, or rather a debuff, whenever he attacks called Master Annihilator that triggers an additional hit whenever an ally attacks the same target. Here you can see the difference in terminology, how hits don't allow Tangita to summon an additional Skitarii warrior. We can take a look at all of this put together on one of my usual infographics. I'll try and upload this to the Eye of Terror Discord as well, in case you ever want to browse through this and other previous characters. I suppose the noteworthy thing here is how Tangita's stats compare to other characters in the game. As someone who primarily works based off summons, it makes sense therefore that the character himself runs with poor stats. His health stats puts him in the 64th percentile, armor in the 35th, melee and ranged in the 42nd and 44th centile respectively. Thanks again to Tawin for being the brains behind the operation and putting all of these values together. I think that Tangita is going to be interesting and worth exploring for the guild boss primes, especially those with the boss adjutant trait that incentivizes you for attacking more. It's a shame that the contamination hex effect doesn't work against bosses, and Tangita's summons seem to want to move off these contamination hexes whenever possible, because that limits Tangita's ceiling somewhat. That's all I've got for today, short and sweet. I'll sign off here with two things. If you're a newer player who hasn't used their referral code, I would love if you could consider entering mine as shown on screen. It earns you 100 Blackstone and supports me in the work that I do. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Finally, if you're interested in joining the Eye of Terror cluster, feel free to drop by our Discord via server link below. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!